If you're a homeowner, investor, or just someone interested in housing solutions in Massachusetts, this video is for you. Today, we're talking about accessory dwelling units, ADUs for short, what they are, why they matter, and how a major shift in Massachusetts law is about to change housing as we know it. So let's start with the basics. An ADU, or accessory dwelling unit, is a secondary housing unit on a single family or multifamily lot. These can be basement apartments, garage conversions, backyard cottages, really any smaller residential unit that's built on the same lot as a primary home. It has to be independent, meaning it has its own kitchen, bathroom, and living space. So traditionally, ADUs have been tightly regulated or outright banned in many towns across Massachusetts, but that is changing thanks to the Affordable Homes Act enacted early 2025. Massachusetts is taking a big step forward in legalizing ADUs statewide. The info in this video is updated as of June 2025, and since ADUs became law earlier this year, we've learned a lot about how municipalities are adopting this and the process to create an ADU. So stay tuned, because later in the video, I'm going to tell you everything I've seen so far, including specific towns making ADU creation easy or more difficult. So here's what the new law does. It allows ADUs up to 900 square feet by right in all residential zones across the state. That means no special permit is needed. If you meet the guidelines, you can build one. Local boards can't arbitrarily say no. This is a major shift from the old system where local zoning laws often made ADUs nearly impossible to build, even in towns facing a housing shortage. The law also applies to properties with up to 4 units. So if you own a 2, 3, or 4 family home, you're still eligible to add an ADU. Now, there seems to be some sort of confusion about this aspect of the law, since the initial wording seemed like ADUs were only allowed for single family homes, but the state came out and clarified that ADUs can be created in any residentially zoned property, which includes multifamilies. So another important change, parking requirements have been loosened. If your property is within a half mile of public transit, and this includes bus stops, you don't need to provide any additional off-street parking for the ADU. That means homeowners near transit hubs can build without the hassle of proving they have space for another driveway or parking spot. And here's something that will get the attention of investors. Owner occupancy is no longer required. So that means that you do not have to live in the main house in order to rent out the ADU. You can rent both the main house and the ADU separately. So this opens the door for small landlords and real estate investors to add value and create more rental units in towns where inventory is tight. If your project meets all of these requirements, it's classified as a protected use ADU. So that label gives you legal protection under the state law, meaning your town can't deny your project as long as you're playing by the state's rules. Now, let's talk about local control, because that's where things get a little complicated. Towns and cities are still allowed to impose what the law calls reasonable restrictions on ADUs, but what does that mean? The law isn't crystal clear. Most experts interpret this to mean that municipalities can regulate ADUs using their existing zoning codes. So things like setbacks, height limits, and lot coverage, but they can't impose arbitrary new restrictions specifically targeting ADUs. For example, they can't say that, oh, you need 10,000 square feet of land to build one, if that's not already required for other types of residential additions. But what happens if a town tries to ignore the state law or drag its feet when someone applies to build an ADU? So that's a gray area right now. The law doesn't spell out what enforcement looks like if a municipality fails to comply. It also doesn't clearly explain what the appeals process is for homeowners who feel they've been unfairly blocked. So this could lead to some legal challenges in the future, especially in towns that have been resistant to zoning reform. So speaking of zoning reform, let's talk about Boston proper, where things take a different turn. But first, if you want updates on ADU news and content, please subscribe to this channel. And if you're getting some value out of this video, please hit that like button below. It really helps engagement and keeps me motivated to continue to put out more material just like this. So back to Boston. So they are not covered by the state's ADU law. Why? Because it has its own separate zoning code and is exempt from certain state level zoning mandates. So while the rest of the state is moving forward with this ADU policy, Boston is operating on a completely different track. Now, to be fair, Boston has done a lot of work on ADUs. The city has its own pilot program, has some great guidebooks and outreach materials encouraging homeowners to build these units. They've even started to streamline some of the permitting. But despite those efforts, it's frustrating to see the city left out of the broader state law, especially given Boston's severe housing shortage and density. So the main hurdle for an ADU in Boston is that they have kept the owner occupancy requirement in place, which severely restricts the ability to utilize an ADU as an investment, creating very low adoption rates. Honestly, I could do a full other video on this, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But it raises a fair question. If this approach is good enough for the rest of the state, why wouldn't it be good for Boston proper? We don't know yet whether Boston will choose to adopt similar policies voluntarily or continue to chart its own course. But if you're a homeowner investor in Boston, you need to follow a completely different set of rules for ADUs. And that means going through a much more localized and often more difficult and restrictive permitting process, unfortunately. So let's recap what this all means in practical terms. If you own a single family or multifamily property anywhere in Massachusetts except Boston, you now have the legal right to build an ADU as long as you meet the state's guidelines. You don't need to live on site, you don't need a special permit, you may not need to provide extra parking, and you can rent it out for income or create extra space for family, whatever you'd like to use it for. So what I love about this law is it's a step in the right direction for addressing the housing shortage across Massachusetts, particularly in suburbs and towns that have historically resisted denser housing. It offers flexibility for homeowners, revenue opportunities for investors, and potentially lower cost housing for renters. But like any new policy, there are still some growing pains. So towns need to align their permitting processes. Homeowners need education and support, and we're all waiting to see how enforcement and compliance will play out, especially in places where local resistance runs strong. So speaking of that local resistance, since we're about 5 months into the new law, we're getting a better sense of those municipalities that are pushing back and those that are embracing it. Those ramping up opposition are towns such as Fall River, Revere, Rockport, Lowell, Milton, and Chelmsford, just to name a few. So if you're looking to build ADUs in those areas, be aware that there may be some pushback. Those embracing ADUs are towns like Newton, which already had a favorable ADU policy in place before the law. They've actually permitted like 70 plus ADUs in the last 5 years, so it's pretty good. You have Melrose, where I live. There's active ADU builds in progress already. And towns like Lexington, Concord, Arlington, Needham have all been very pro-housing. In general, it seems to me like more towns are embracing this than not, but that's just what I'm seeing in my research. So if you have any info on your specific town, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below so I can potentially include it on future videos. For now, the key takeaway is this: Massachusetts is taking ADUs seriously, and if you're in real estate, planning to build, or just trying to make the most of your property, it's a great time to get familiar with what's possible. If you want to learn more about how ADUs can work on your property, or if you're curious about zoning specifics in your town, I've got resources linked in the description below. And if you're a Massachusetts homeowner or investor looking for one-on-one guidance, I offer a full ADU feasibility analysis and roadmap service that walks you through every step, from zoning to design and contractor referrals, and that can be found on my website at yourmassadu.com. If you want a deeper dive into ADUs, you can check out my first video on this topic, and I go into much more detail on different types of ADUs, the cost to build them, and how you can identify which properties are best to take advantage of them. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next video.